Hi, we're Richard and Jackie from Early Retirement Wanderlust, and if you've been watching the channel recently, you'll know that we've just got back from a 6-week campervan road trip around the French Alps, the Provence and the Côte d'Azur.
And as is usual now, whenever we come back from a trip, we always do a video just to go through some of our highs, some of the lows, some of the things that we've learned from our trip, and to have a breakdown of all of the costs for the whole of the trip. So if you didn't catch any of the videos from the recent French trip, then you need to go back and watch them. We had the most wonderful time. We started off in Chamonix for my birthday, and we had such a great time exploring and hiking there. And then the journey ended in the beautiful Mediterranean town of Menton.
So what we want to do in this video is to very quickly go through some of the highs and some of the lows of the trip. We want to think about some of the things that we've learned on a 6-week road trip, and then probably the most important and popular bit right at the end is when Jackie gets her little book out and goes through the finances and the budget for the entire 6-week road trip. So let's get on with the highs and start with probably the biggest high of them all.
Yeah, definitely, and literally starting with a high. For my birthday treat, I wanted to go on to the Aiguille de Midi, which is one of the highest points that you can get to in Europe. It's a cable car that takes you almost to the start point of hiking to Mont Blanc.
It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and it is quite incredible. It's not cheap, and we definitely targeted it as one of our sort of milestones of the trip that we definitely wanted to do. We sort of rounded it a little bit in terms of budget, in the fact that we were always planning to stay in Chamonix for a week and do loads of walking, so we were going to have to buy a lift pass anyway. So the lift pass also includes the lift up to the Aiguille de Midi. It's not cheap, but if you are going there, you have to do it. But you have to make sure that the weather's good for you.
We had just such a wonderful time. We went up on a morning where it was really, really clear right across the valley, apart from just a slight cloud inversion up towards the Swiss borders. But apart from that, you could see for miles. And it was quite quiet because we were on one of the first lifts to go up. We had sort of moments to ourselves, which I was really surprised. It was just one of them pinch yourself moments of, wow, this is just incredible.
And for me, the first part of the trip was a real highlight in terms of all the alpine driving. I love my alpine driving, and I love getting up into the high mountains. And if you've not tried it before, I'd thoroughly recommend it to you. It's not as scary as it seems. I think it's perhaps a little bit more scary being the passenger, isn't it?
It is at some points, because I'm on the side of the road where there is the deep ditch sometimes. But yeah, some passes were so good for Richard, he even had to go back up again.
Yeah, well, we couldn't see when we were going up the Col de Galibier for the first time. Once we got to the top section, it was completely misted out. So we wanted to see what it was like the following day in much better weather conditions. And linked to that, some of the most memorable moments we had were actually staying on some of the cols. So we had a wild camp on the Col de Liseran, and we had a wild camp just below the Col de Galibier. And when you're in those high mountains, no one bothers you. It's all okay to park there and stay there for the night. Quite often you get visited by the sheep or the shepherd, or even better, the sheepdog that looks after everything, and also bizarrely the donkey.
Oh yeah, I forgot about the donkey.
But staying in those sort of high mountain areas in the middle of nowhere in splendid isolation, absolute highlight for me.
And another highlight for us was going further south into the Provence. We stayed at a campsite that was right next to the Pont du Gard. And if you've not seen the Pont du Gard, it's a 3-story aqueduct, quite incredible. And we saved going until the morning after we'd arrived there, and we got up before dawn and watched the sunrise, and we were the only people there apart from one other couple. It was just a really still morning. It was a beautiful sunrise. The bridge was just reflected on the river, which was really still and calm. It was just such a really surreal moment. Again, we had it to ourselves, and it was just that splendid isolation of waking up and just one of those wow moments.
And absolutely free. And there were so many of those experiences on this trip. You don't always have to pay the big tourist bucks to go up the Aiguille de Midi. There are so many experiences, and that morning at the Pont de Gard was just quite memorable. And then it finished off, and we were a little bit gutted, weren't we? Because it finished off at Menton.
Yeah, we had stayed on the coast for about 10 days, and our last 3 days we booked into a town called Menton, which is right on the Italian border. And I think, had we known about that, we perhaps would have based ourselves there for most of our time, because the campsite was within walking distance of a train station. We could walk down to the beach. Granted, it is about a kilometre, very steep downhill to get to the beach, but it was a lovely atmosphere there. But you could get the train up and down the coast really easily, and it saved all the bother of trying to drive. It was really busy driving around the coastal towns. And it was just a beautiful town in itself. Menton had all these coloured buildings. It's built up into the cliffs. It's stunning, wasn't it?
It was, and it's definitely got a place in our heart, and we've talked about it loads since we've been back, and we're already thinking about how on earth we can get back there. But I think definitely using it as a base to explore more of the Côte d'Azur. So then, on to the negatives. There weren't many negatives or low points of the trip. In fact, I think there was only just one low point.
Yeah, we dodged all the awful weather, so that wasn't a low point. Yeah, the only low point we had was being broken into when we were in Nîmes. We'd had a lovely morning. We'd been in to see the bridge in Avignon, was that
We
right?
had, yeah.
Yep. So we'd been to see the bridge in Avignon, and then we'd driven into Nîmes, parked in a supermarket, just gone in quickly to get a few bits and pieces, came back 15 minutes later, and they'd pushed the window out of the van and stolen quite a few of our tech bits, which was annoying and a bit upsetting at the time because someone's been into our space.
But we did manage to fix it, ironically. I bumped into a subscriber who tipped me off to a YouTube video that was about 6 years old by some German bloke about how to fix your window back in. And I managed to fix the window. But yeah, we've gone through a process, I suppose, in our own minds, really. We decided it wasn't going to bother us because it is only stuff, and it wasn't going to ruin our trip, and it didn't ruin our trip. We've had quite a chase around, and I think it probably, in terms of insurance claims, and I think it's probably been a big learning point for us, which leads us into our learning points.
Yeah, we did think we were really well covered with insurance. As I said, the van had the window pushed in. We didn't need to claim through our van insurance because actually Richard fixed the window. Van Shades have very kindly offered to fix the shade for us that they'd smashed off as well when they broke the window through. So it just left the possessions. Our house insurance, however, was a bit awkward, I think, when we rang.
Yeah, we thought that we were covered for personal possessions outside the home, and we are, but when you looked into the fine print of things, it was going to get very, very tricky. There was, first of all, the comment, and I think we shared this in a previous video, in the fact that our drone that was stolen was actually classed as an aircraft, which was classed as a vehicle, which means that the home insurance would not cover it for insurance purposes. So that was a bit of a hammer blow. And then there was a £250 excess that we knew about, but then there was various clauses that we were questioned about. We thought that we were covered for possessions to be outside the home for up to 60 days because we could travel out into Europe for 60 days. But there was a bit of a clause in that.
Yeah, so obviously, none of our trips are over 60 days when we're away. But the first question she asked was, how long have your items been out of the house since November last year? Obviously, we go on quite a few different road trips. We'd been to Thailand within that time as well. So our possessions had actually been out of the house for longer than 60 days, and they are not covered, which wasn't in the main headline bits. It was buried. In fact, I still haven't managed to find it in the paperwork I've got. Buried deep somewhere inside one of their clauses was this fact that your goods aren't covered if they're outside of the house for more than 60 days. So just one to look out for. Luckily, we tried our third insurance, which was our travel insurance. There were a few minor clauses within that, but we did manage to get probably a good half of the value of the goods that were stolen. They had a little clause in the travel insurance as well. Nice little sting there.
Yeah, it was a strange one because we were dealing with a handler on our claim, and she was lovely and she was really professional, and she had some tough messages to give us in terms of the insurance policy implementation. But she was really supportive, and we do understand it. We thought that we were insured. The headline figure was that we were insured for £2,000 personal possessions, so we thought we were okay with that. There was a clause further down that said that you were only insured for up to £350 in total for valuables.
That wasn't further down, that was on page 23.
So on page 23, it said that you were insured for £350 worth of valuables. And then if you then got referred back to page 3, it defined what valuables were, and pretty much it was everything you could possibly think of. It could have been phones, Kindles, laptops, anything electronic, anything camera-wise, jewellery, gold, watches. It even had things like furs in there. So we couldn't quite work out where non-valuable items would come from. So we've learned a lot from that.
Yeah.
But it was a really tricky one, because to navigate through that, and we read all of our policies, but we definitely felt that we'd missed that. But it was possibly, is it a bit harsh to say that it was hidden? I don't know.
Anyway,
At
the end of the day, we have managed to replace some of the stuff really cheaply, actually. Things like our microphones, the original set we bought were £200. They've since bought out new ones with DJI that were only £100. So we've pretty much managed to replace most things that were stolen, and probably only had to put a couple of £100 of our own money. So I don't think we've done too badly. But yeah, we've learned a big lesson. Really carefully check your insurances, particularly if you're like us and you travel for more than 60 days away from the home with all your possessions.
The next thing we learned was a bit of a contrast between our trip earlier in the summer, where we went to Spain and Portugal, and then this trip when we were travelling, well, exclusively in France. And that is how expensive France is.
Yes, when I go through the budget, you'll notice, particularly with the campsites, the costs. Although I say that, we did stay on more campsites after we had the van broken into, because we were a bit worried about the window not being secure for a while until Richard had his little tip off. So yeah, the campsites were a huge shock, and food supermarket shopping was so much more expensive. Something that we were really surprised about is how busy it was. Maybe it's because we were further south in France and we were right down on the coast. We found ourselves, even towards the end of September, turning up at campsites because we don't pre-book many places, and they were full. At one point, near a town called Gordes, we really struggled. We'd got to the third campsite that was full, and luckily the fourth campsite did have somewhere for us, but we were getting a bit panicky at times that maybe we need to start pre-booking, which is when we did pre-book the campsite at Menton.
And that never happens to us on our trips, and it really did spook us. So if you are travelling in September and you are travelling to perhaps those southern regions, it's something to be aware of, because it's something that we were completely and utterly unaware of, and it did shock us and it did spook us. You will always get somewhere to stay. Of course you will. You just got to keep driving, but you don't want to be leaving that too late in the day.
If you watch the channel regularly, you'll know that at the end of every trip, I do a recap of how much we've spent. And while we're on the road, I keep this little book in the dashboard, and every time we spend any money at all, whether that's on tolls, petrol, food, coffees, I write down every penny that we've spent. So, breaking down the costs of this year's trip. The ferries that we booked pretty much the last minute, we only booked them the week before we went, and we did go out in mid-August, so it was still part of the high season, were £280 return. We spent a total of £524.22 on petrol. We did, I think, was it about 3,000 miles, Rich?
Yep.
The tolls did surprise us how much we'd spent. The tolls down to Chamonix were only £83, and then we sort of went through the mountains to get down to the south of France. But the tolls driving back from Menton back up to Dunkirk cost us £153, and it gave us a total, with all the other little bits of tolls in between, of £245.34. Obviously, we could have taken routes where we didn't use the tolls, but particularly on the way home, we just wanted to get home. We didn't want to spend time in the north of the country where the weather hadn't been great. We wanted to just spend as long as we could right down on the south coast and then blast it home. So £150 was the balance. It was either time or it was money, and money won. The campsites were really expensive compared to when we did the Spanish and Portuguese road trip. We spent £903, and we were away for 40 nights. 7 of those nights we didn't stay on any campsites, so they were free. It works out at an average of £22.57 per night, which is still great. If you think in the UK, trying to find a campsite for £22 a night, there aren't that many out there. Experiences, we did the Aiguille de Midi, we got the ferry across to Saint-Tropez, we got the train right along the French coast. I even had to pay for 2 train tickets if you watch the video, because I lost the first ticket that was €25 for both of us. And we hired a canoe in the gorges de Verdun. But all of those experiences added up to £352.96, and just a lifetime of memories. So worth it. I've kept a breakdown of all our little coffees and beers and eating out. And actually on this trip, it's probably one of the most expensive trips for eating out. Part of that was because it was my birthday and I was determined I was going to have a few treats in Chamonix. And part of it was us licking our wounds just a little bit when we got down to the French coast after we'd been broken into. And we did have a bit of a splurge, I'm not going to lie. We did treat ourselves a little bit because we were sulking. So we spent £322.38 on eating out, coffees and beers. But that's in 6 weeks. Still pretty good, I think. Supermarket food, we spent £615.53. We spent £17.39 on clothes washing, £7.94 refilling up on LPG. It's really easy to get in France and it's really cheap. We've got an underslung tank, so it's easy to do. And we only ever paid for 1 lot of parking, which was €4. So that was pretty good as well. So we spent a total of £3,272.93 for 40 nights. And when I worked it out, that's an average of £81.80 per day that we were away of total spends, including averaging obviously the ferry, all the petrol, all the tolls. So I thought that was pretty good. As I always say, we were away for 6 weeks and we have a £200 a week budget when we're living at home. So take £1,200 off that. The trip cost us £2,000 extra. So yeah, a great trip, £530 a week for the trip. And like I said, a lifetime of memories, and ready to plan the next one. Hopefully you found the roundup of some use and perhaps thinking about some of the costs if you're planning one of your own trips. We particularly wanted in this trip to stay in France, and we wanted to stay just in one corner of France because, as we've said in quite a few of our other videos, it's so easy when you're out on a road trip and you've got no plans to just keep moving further and further away. So it was great to have lengthy periods of time in one area and really explore it.
And we felt that the road trip had everything for us in terms of our interests. So it had the high mountains, it had the history, it had the beaches, and it had the sea. So it really, over the course of the 6 weeks, gave us everything that we could have possibly asked for.
It also gave us lots of nice rosé wines. The saying, Richard loves rosé. You should have seen his face when we went into the Whispering Angels vineyard to have a look and the wine tasting.
Yeah, I was at home, completely at home. They obviously recognised me as I went in. It's like, Richard loves rosé.
Not Whispering Angels rosé though, because we can't afford that.
No, absolutely not. So that's it from this particular road trip. We had an absolute blast, and we hope that you enjoyed coming along and that you enjoyed some of the videos that we produced. But we are now in nervous anticipation for the delivery of our new van before our next adventures continue.
Yeah, I think we're down to a matter of days. We're hoping by the end of next week we will be able to pick the van up. And we have got our first trip planned. We are hoping to get up to the Scottish Highlands and maybe one of the islands as well.
A little bit of winter travel before Christmas arrives in the new van. So we're really excited for that. But that's it from us for today. See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.